Squishies, welcome back to another vlog. This is Infinity Train, Season 1, Episodes 6 to 10, the second half of the mini-series or the first season or whatever you want to call it. So for starters, just wanted to let you know, it's been a little while since I watched this, but I took notes for once. So I should remember everything I wanted to say. That said, let's jump right in with Episode 6, The Broken Car. Now, sort of one of the main focuses of The Broken Car is what happened at the end of the previous episode, when Tulip put on a glove over her number because she wants to stop obsessing over it. She wants to stop focusing on something she doesn't entirely understand, can't entirely control, and just focus on keeping going. They're thinking, keep on heading toward the front of the train and hope they can reach the conductor. Of course, they have no idea how long the train is. They have no idea if they'll reach the conductor in their lifetime. But what else can they do? So that's a big focus, and that's thematically reflected in what's going on with 1-1, which this is really 1-1's only focus episode, or at least the closest thing he has to one. The show pretty much entirely follows Tulip. It's limited perspective. We really only ever see what Tulip sees. Steven Universe is similarly structured. So for that matter is Harry Potter. It's actually become a pretty common structure in children's media, where television usually will move between points of view, or take purely external point of view, where you're not focused on any one character's perspective, or at least not exclusively focused. Infinity Train pretty much always follows Tulip. I can't think of any exceptions. So, for the record, if a character tells a story and there's like a flashback sequence, that is not an exception, as long as they're telling the story to the focus character. So, for example, Steven Universe has flashback episodes, but they're all stories told to Steven or told in his presence. So, anyway, this is reflected in 1-1 because 1-1 gets fixated on the car being broken. Somewhere in the back of his head, he remembers that he is responsible for the train and for the construction of cars, and so he blames himself for this car being broken. He therefore feels compelled to fix it, even though consciously he doesn't understand why he feels compelled to fix it. How do I want to phrase this? This is exactly paralleling what's going on with Tulip on two levels. It's not her fault she's on the train. She doesn't know how to control what happens with her number, so it's not, even though it is her responsibility, there's not really anything she can do other than keep on moving on. And of course, there's her parents' divorce, which again is something that her responsibility is how she deals with it. She doesn't control it, she doesn't get a say in it, and she kind of just has to move on with her life. And it's the same for 1-1. He cannot fix the car. He can only disrupt things and make it worse. So there's really no choice except to move on. Next episode is the Chrome Car. I love this episode. I love the visuals of this episode. It's just so pretty. The Crystal Car episode was also very pretty. I like those kinds of cold, angular environments as background to characters that are brighter and more energetic. That is a contrast that works really well for me. And I think it worked really well in the Chrome Car. But of course, in the Chrome Car, we've got... You know what? That actually occurs to me. In the Chrome Car, we occasionally see Mirror Tulip's perspective. I don't remember if she gets a name of her own, but we occasionally see her perspective instead of Tulip's. But her perspective is a reflection of Tulip's perspective. And she is a reflection of Tulip. The difference between them, so little dogs yap a lot because everything is bigger than them. They live in a world that must feel constantly dangerous, so they are a little aggressive and loud to try to push it back. So what underlies Atticus's energy and bravery is a degree of fear. And so his reflection is a coward. 1-1 presents as two distinct voices, but underneath that is the machine that runs the train, is a single consciousness. And so Mirror 1-1 is a single calm voice. So Mirror Tulip embodies what is underneath Tulip, which makes sense because the mirror is literally underneath them. It's reflecting what's under. And so for Mirror Tulip, what's underneath Tulip is a certain degree of selfishness, which is not inherently a bad thing. As the saying goes, if I'm not for myself, who will be? If I am only for myself, who am I? You do need to be somewhat selfish to live in this world, because you can't expect other people to put your needs first. At the same time, you can't be entirely selfish. You do have to take into account the needs and wants of others. It's just you can't expect that of them. That's an even higher degree of selfishness. And that is kind of Tulip's form of selfishness, is not expressing her needs and her feelings and expecting other people to act in her interests anyway, expecting her parents to stay together, all that kind of thing, while she just hides in a room. I say expecting, like she knows it's not happening, but emotionally, like that's the thing that is upsetting her, that she's not getting, that she feels she should. So Mirror Tulip is rather selfish, but underneath that selfishness is a desire for a normal life. That's the inversion of Tulip. Tulip expresses a desire for a normal life, for what she's familiar with, but underneath that is that degree of selfishness. And we see that similarity between them when Mirror Tulip tries to leave the car the first time and she can't. She cannot abandon it. She can't move on because she is held back, and she has to go back for regular Tulip, so that they can and help her before Mirror Tulip can leave and embark on the adventure that is normal life. That's exactly what's going to happen with Tulip at the end of the series, the end of the season. She has the opportunity to go home. She can't do it because she has to go back and help the others, and then she can go home to the adventure that is normal life. Next up is the ball pit car. And the ball pit car highlights a key difference between Tulip and Amelia. They are both sad. They have both lost something that was hugely important in their lives. Because Tulip, in a sense, has lost her parents. She no longer has her parents as a unit. They are now her mother and her father functioning separately. Amelia has lost her husband. Their worlds have been shattered by these losses. But there is one key difference between them, which is that Tulip's world still contains good things. Tulip can still have pointless fun and pure play. And that's what's happening at the beginning of the ball pit car, is really obviously the bunny doll, the quest he's having them do is completely made up. The artifact that must be returned, he freely gives them afterwards. The force field is entirely imaginary. The puzzles are simple and silly. Not even puzzles, obstacles. The whole quest is just a game, but it's a game that Tulip gladly joins in and has fun with. And that's something which Amelia is not capable of, and we see that with her destruction of this space that exists for pure play and pure fun. To Amelia, that's just an obstacle in the way of getting back what she lost. But that's exactly why she can't move on. And of course, we get one of the most brutal, actually the most brutal scene in the show, when Atticus dies. The whole thing is framed like a murder. The cutting away to a shadow was something that old movies did to get around censorship codes. You couldn't, in some places you couldn't show someone being shot and killed on screen, so you would see the shadow of someone being shot and killed. In particular, I remember a very prominent instance of this in the old Scarface, not the 80s one, the old black and white one that the 80s one was a remake of. So it has some real impact, and then in some ways it makes it even worse that Atticus emerges as one of those monsters from the first episode. In part because of what it implies about those monsters. In part just because losing him is bad enough. Having him transform into something horrible is worse. But it's also Amelia. Amelia has turned Alistair? Adric? I'm blanking on Amelia's husband's name. But she's turned his loss into something way worse. Into something monstrous that harms others. Bad enough that he's gone, but she's turned that into all these terrible things happening to other people. And finally, at the end of the episode, sorry, I need to occasionally jiggle the mouse to keep my notes up. Finally, at the end of the episode, we see Tulip giving up, and her number starts climbing. And that's interesting because so much of the show up to this point has been about moving on, letting go, not solving the problem as being the solution. But there's a difference between giving up and acceptance, because that's really what the show has been about, is about accepting things as they are so that you can then deal with them as they are. Giving up is something else entirely. When you give up, you're not accepting things as they are, you're rejecting them. You are saying, if this is how things are, then I will not try to do anything about it. It's too much, and I'm done. Whereas acceptance is, this is how things are, and that is the baseline from which I will work to make things how I want them to be, insofar as I can. And when she changes her mind about that, when she finally understands the difference between those two things, and finally understands some problems can be solved, some cannot, you gotta try to solve the ones that can be solved, but you gotta accept and move on from the ones that can't. That's when her door opens. And when she rejects her door, just like Miratola did. So, right, I kind of elided those ball pit and past car. It's at the end of past car that we get that choice. In what we get in past car, again, is this reflection between the two of them. She empathizes with Amelia. She's young, but she's starting to understand both loss and the feeling of being lost. And that's where Amelia is. She has not experienced a death like Amelia has, but she has experienced a life-altering loss. And she wants to regain what was, but it can't be done. And fully accepting that does open her gate home, but she has one final revelation left, even beyond what the train wanted to teach her, which is that it doesn't matter whose fault things are. It just literally does not matter. It doesn't matter whose fault it is that Atticus was transformed into this monster. If she can fix it, she must. It's her responsibility, regardless of whether it's her fault. And that's what matters, is responsibility. Sometimes fault ties in with that, but sometimes not. When I was a kid, my sisters and I would sometimes fight and get into arguments about who had to clean whatever, because it wasn't, we would claim it's not my fault, it's dirty, but somebody has to clean it. So the responsibility has to fall on someone, regardless of fault. So she needs to stop trying to fix what can't be fixed and focus on fixing what can be. Which brings us into the final episode, and its presentation of Amelia as an entirely pathetic figure. I mean, she throws that pipe through the table or whatever it was that Tulip was using as cover. She is straight up willing to murder a child. So she's not nice or even all that sympathetic. What she is pathetic. She is miserable. She is emotionally very weak. She's kind of right about being doomed. Her number is never going to go down enough to get her home in her lifetime. And she's lashing out. She's trying to recreate something that can't be recreated and just making a mess. And it's pathetic. It is inspiring of pathos. I feel bad for her. Not sympathetic, but like, it does genuinely suck to be Amelia, and much of that is done by Amelia. And we see that. We see how that is because Tulip is sympathetic to Amelia. She does sympathize. And she says at one point, when she's trying to convince Amelia to change her ways, ultimately pretty much successfully, she says, Tulip says, "I've never lost anyone I love." And like 5 seconds later, she's having to say goodbye to 1-1 and Atticus. She's about to lose people she loves. She says she loves them, and then she loses them. Presumably forever. I really am not sure if Tulip is going to be a character in season 2 or not. I could see her facing some new kind of crisis that the train tries to teach her. I could also see introducing a new character to go on adventures with Atticus and maybe 1-1 and maybe Cat. Or at least Cat is a recurring. Or I could see the next season being the same setting but an entirely new set of characters. Nobody in common except maybe 1-1 cameoing at the end as the conductor. It's really hard to say where the series is going to go from here because this was really obviously done as a one-off miniseries with no intention of continuing it. But regardless, she does have to leave them, presumably forever. Certainly she and they think at this point that it's forever. But we see 7 months later, she's dealing with it. She seems well-adjusted and healthy, and she's not wreaking chaos like Amelia did in response to her loss. She doesn't seem to be trying to get back to what was, which is something I really hope they don't do. God, I just thought of that. If the second season starts with Tulip deliberately trying to get to the train to show up because she misses Atticus and 1-1, I will be really, really disappointed. Because again, the whole point of the show was you can't go back to the way things were, and it's destructive to try. Regardless, 7 months later, she's dealing with it well. She's going off to camp, which tells us something about how long she was on that train. Because assuming the camp is annual, it was time to go to camp at the beginning of the first episode, and it's time to go to camp at the end of the last episode. So those are probably a year apart. They could conceivably be 2 years apart. I doubt it's any more of that because Tulip does not visibly grow between the first episode and the last episode. And I think if she spent more than... I think if she spent 2 or 3 years on the train, she would be going from young teenager to middle teenager, and there would be significant physical growth in that time, because that is a time when most people have significant physical growth. But I could see it being 7 months or maybe... this 7 month time skip implies she spent either 5 months or maybe a year and 5 months on the train. But I think 5 months is likelier. Her parents must have been freaking out. I can only imagine what it must have been like for them, for their child to run away just as heavy snow hit and then never turn up again. They have to have assumed that her dead body was somewhere out there in the woods, in the snow, and just never found. And that is horrifying. But 7 months after that, things seem to be basically okay. Clearly there are lasting effects on Tulip from the train, not just in her being more well-adjusted, but for example, she walks past the mirror and has no reflection. She has been changed by her time on the train, and I'm sure people around her notice some of those changes. At some point, somebody's going to notice she has no reflection, and I imagine that would be an interesting conversation. Hopefully they do not assume she's a vampire and try to stake her. But I think the point of showing her as having no reflection is to remind us that she has learned things from the time on the train. It has changed her, and who she is now is in part a product of her time on the train. Overall, like I keep saying, this really ended up being a show about acceptance. The second half was much more focused than the first. The first half was kinda, let's explore the train and try to work out what it means and how it functions, what the rules are. But there really aren't that many rules at all. And that's something that Tulip struggles with, which I think is why she's a programmer. I work with a lot of developers. I work in a development shop. I myself am not a developer. I don't know any programming languages. I cannot do that kind of work to save my life. But I work with a lot of them. And part of my job is sometimes I have to tell them, you have to do this thing. There is no clever workaround. You just have to do it. Because one of my jobs is enforcing accessibility requirements, which are, making sure that software is usable by people with a wide variety of disabilities. And so I have to tell them sometimes, no, there is not a discrete list of rules that if you follow them perfectly, your software is accessible. There's judgment calls to be made, and there's also things where you just can't exploit the rules to make a shortcut. There's some things that there's just no way around. You have to put in the effort and do them. And there's some things that you can't do because there's no way to make them fully accessible to everybody. And I've found that programmers struggle with that as a group. And I think that makes sense because I think to be good at that kind of work, you need to have a brain that thinks in terms of rule sets and ways to use them to achieve what you want. Systems that are predictable and manipulable and solvable. That's the key word. And not everything is. Not everything is a problem to be solved. Some things just are. And you can't solve them. You just have to live them. And a big part of this show was about Tulip learning that her parents' divorce is a problem in the sense of, this is a thing I have to deal with. It's not a problem in the sense of, this is something I can solve. It's a life problem, not a math problem. And that's something she struggles to understand, that there is a difference. and that some things cannot be fixed. You just have to live with them and figure out how to deal with them. And that's something that I actually really appreciate. It makes a good counterbalance to a show, like to some of Cartoon Network's other shows, in particular like Steven Universe, where not only can everything be fixed, everything can be fixed peacefully. And you can always talk it out, which is a form of power fantasy. And it's one that I think there's space for, there's room for, but at the same time, it's good to have that counterbalance of, well, no, some things can't be fixed. You just have to deal. And I like that we're getting that. There's a truth there that you don't often see. In media in general, really, most problems that get brought up in media are solvable problems, and we see the characters solve them. I like that that's just not the case here. And so I think that's about it. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Check out my Patreon for early access to vlogs, essays, let's plays, and more. And I'll see you all next time. Bye!